Welcome to Just Kampers and welcome back to Lewis's Beetle. In this episode, really exciting, I'm actually going to get the floor pan in, get the heater channel in and the A-post. So we're going to do some welding. So it may not look like it, but we have made some huge steps forward. I know at the moment there's nothing in the car and it's pretty empty, but the preparation is done. We can finally fit our floor pan and our heater channel together and then we can get welding. As you can see, all the edges are cleaned and zinc primed as well. So we've got all that protection. This is the weld through primer. So it's not going to burn too much when we weld through. I've had to put a couple of sections in. So little extra bits before we can put our panels back in. I had to obviously make, the bottom of the B post here. That's cool. A bit on the inside here as well. And then we've got a new section to go at the rear, which I'll show you once we get the floor pan in place. But first, I think we pop everything back into place, screw it back where it was, and then we can start welding. So this particular floor pan actually comes in two parts. The rear part is separate, which makes it really easy for fitting. This part I'm going to bolt up loosely first. So it goes in here. I'm going to try and get it over there, that's right. And then pop a bolt in so it can't fall out, but it can move about. And what that's going to do is give me enough room to get the floor pan up, because the floor pan's got to sit on top of this. And then once this is bolted back into place, we'll then weld through this. So that's that. Next, let's see if we can get the floor pan in the hole. We can grab this, and this has been lovingly painted underneath by Lewis himself. I just want to let you know. Obviously, I need to make sure that I get the rear of that floor pan over the top of that rear section, like so. And we should be able to slide in the front. These floor pans are a really good fit, actually. Once there. Look at that, in position. That's cool. Obviously the back end is still quite loose, so we can move that about. And the only other thing that's worth a mention before we put the heater channel in is the rear closing panel for the heater channel that would normally be here. Actually on this one was actually quite rotten, so we took it out of the way. But if you were fitting this heater channel with the body on, you would need to remove that section. So you'd cut that out and put a new one in afterwards. Otherwise it doesn't allow you to wiggle the heater channel into position. The heater channel. Right. Now this is a little bit fiddly. As I say, because we've got that bit removed from the rear, it allows us to slide it in the back like that. And then we'll try and manipulate it around. Ooh, that's nice. And then we can get the front in. Might need a little tiny bit of persuasion on that side of it. Pretty close. Okay, let me just give it a little bit of persuasion at the front so it goes past our little lip that we'll be welding to once it's in place. Lovely. Okay, that's looking quite good. Let's put the support in the back. So, accurately measured, it was one of those, and one of these. That puts this section exactly 90mm from our line here, which is where we first measured. So at this point, it's definitely easier to pop in the body seal again. So this seal goes between the floor pan and our heater channel. As you can see, this one's pretty old and ropey, so we could do away with that. And we've got a lovely new one. The lovely new one comes in one continuous length, so obviously we need to cut it to length and pop the bolt holes in it. So that's my next little job, we'll get that in there. We're not welding anywhere near this, so we're not going to melt it. So let's get this bit in. So it is quite easy if you've got the old one, obviously. We can make sure the holes line up with our current floor pan, which they do, so then I can just mark through those holes and make the new holes in here. Obviously, if you haven't got this seal, then you can just pop your rubber against the floor pan and mark off the holes that way. So again, with my magic white pencil, I'm going to flip this over. Right, once we've run a drill through our holes, we can then either open them up with a hole punch like this, or you can use a Stanley knife and just cut a bigger hole. It just makes locating with the bolts a little bit easier. So I can fit that there. Like that. And we've got a nice size hole to be able to get our bolt through easier. That's the seal, and it's quite easy to fit. You can put a bit of lubricant with it, like just a light maintenance spray if you need to sort of feed it in, and you can stretch it. But at this position, we can actually move the floor pan away from our heater channel and get it tucked in. So that's good. All the bolts are in. pretty much in position, so let's put our screws in. The first of our little temporary fixing screws, I'm going to pop in here in the heater channel. This should sort of pull everything into position. With the sort of pre-fit screws, I just generally put in a few just to make sure it's holding things down in the right position. So I've got one at the front, a couple down the side, one in the front here, obviously to keep this panel up against here. So when we start welding, we're going to minimise the amount of movement. Next we can slot in our bottom part of our A-post. I'll try and get that in position. Again, I have made a screw hole at the back, so I'll try and line that up. Right. I think that looks pretty good. Excellent. Okay. So checking with my book and obviously what I've written on our datum here, I'm just going to double check that our measurements are correct. So 210 there, 210 there. So nothing's moved, that's good. And our new piece can actually come this way just an absolute fraction. You see I've drawn round the end of where my tape measure goes, so I can't get it wrong. But what I do need to do is remeasure and put our increments on the bottom here, because I measured every 10 centimetres across the bottom to line up with our measurements from here. So far all our measurements are tying up, so that means I can go ahead and tack this here. This is our last support for our heater channel, so once that's tacked in place, nothing's going to move and we can crack on welding. Perfect, so we've got good rigidity now. That's all ready to go.
You all right, guys?
Oh, hello, is Shaun coming to do a bit of QC?
Quality control.
Yeah, have a little look.
I've been watching you on the video cameras, so I thought I'd come down before you did any more welding to make sure it's all okay.
Perfect. I wouldn't want to weld it in place and not have you check it, Shaun.
Exactly. I think I've checked this project from the start, so
I
I probably need to have a proper look round it. Obviously, Lewis has asked me to do this, to be fair.
Has he?
Yeah, being an expert.
This is true. This is true. Okay, Shaun. What do you reckon?
I like what you've done with the bottom of the B-pillar.
Thank you very much.
Look at that.
That'll do, won't it?
Yeah, I've seen some proper horrible repairs there, so that's nice. And you've got the ceiling already.
He's good, isn't he? He's good.
So what do you reckon? Another hour, you'll be done?
Half hour, mate.
Come and do some real work.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. We're going to booked in for MOT this afternoon, so I need to get cracking. So before I go too far, I wanted Lewis to come and have a look just before I start welding and stuff. So what do you reckon, Lewis?
Looks good again, all back in place.
That's good, that's positive.
So, what will this bit match up eventually?
He don't want too much, does he? Yes, Lewis, what I'm going to do, when we remove this horrible panel, obviously we're going to replace this. We spoke about that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Then I'll address this situation then. And then we'll make a nice new bit that will come down and join onto here.
What's going on here then?
I'm glad you said that. So we've got to put a closing panel in here, Lewis, that will close the back end of that heater channel.
Okay.
Obviously we sell those.
Yes.
But there was a little bit I did have to make as well. But I'll show you that when we're doing it.
Ah, okay. So what's next?
Well, glad you asked that, Lewis. We're pretty much all ready to zip round with the welder. So we'll get the floor pan welded in, and we'll get our heater channel welded in, and then lastly, I'll get the A-pillar welded in.
Nice.
Yeah, that'll be pretty good. And then we can all smile a bit.
Yeah. Get a job.
The most important part of any welding job is preparation. So obviously we need our welding helmet, gloves, suitable clothing, and also what I've tried to do is shield the rest of the car from the welding, because obviously we didn't have the luxury of stripping the whole car down, as in getting the glass out, taking all the dashboard bits to pieces. So I've put some shielding in. I've taken the steering wheel off to give me a little bit more room, and what that will do will enable me to get in underneath, and when I'm welding we'll just hopefully contain all the welding spatter inside this part of the car, and not to burn anything, because obviously we haven't got any carpet this side, so that's a definite no-no. We don't want to be setting light to carpet and stuff. So the first panel I'm actually welding in is the floor pan. Obviously I've made sure that all of our edges are clean and they're zinc primed as well, so they've got a weld through primer on. I've drilled holes all the way around the outside of the floor pan where the original spot welds would have been, and I'm going to plug weld. So what that means is I'm going to use the MIG to go through the first hole and weld on the lower panel, and then gently, small, very small circular motion, and actually bring the top panel into that weld pool. Obviously I need to keep the two panels extremely tight, so I have put a couple of screws in to give us a starting point, and once I start, then I can use like a block of wood or a wooden ended hammer or something like that, just to get those two panels to meet before you start welding. And obviously just double check that you can get to everything. You know, I've got a frame here, so I'm going to have to work around the frame with my helmet on. But the most important thing is that you can get in and get that torch set up to every part that you're going to be welding. So a quick dry run like this is a good idea to make sure you can actually get there. Obviously the front part of the pan I can do from this side. The part that goes down by the seat runner, I'm probably going to have to do from the other side because I can't quite see and I can't get my torch in from this angle. Also, if you're welding on your own, you need to make sure you have a fire extinguisher with you. And don't do too much welding in one go because you can get carried away with the gun, welding away, and you haven't even noticed that you've set fire to the car somewhere. So I normally do a small amount of welding and then remove my helmet and just check underneath the car and in the other side of where you've been welding and make sure there isn't any flames going on. If there is, obviously you can put them out pretty quickly. Other than that, if you can do it with somebody else who can spot, say for instance I'm welding inside the car but I'm welding through to the underside, you could get a spotter underneath just to make sure you're not setting fire to the undersill or any paint under there. Again, when you're welding two panels together, you need to remove as much of the contaminants as possible, i.e. old paint, undersill, anything like that, because it will burn. So that's why I've prepped all the edges, ground them all back, and then applied a weld-through primer. So I'm going to start on this inner edge here and just make sure that obviously our two panels are pushed together. I've got my block of wood, and I'm only about 4 holes away from the screw that I put in. So I'm going to see if I can get a start here at this point, and then I can move along. So I'm going to get the first plug weld in. Here we go. So I'm going to go straight through the first panel and weld on the bottom, and then gently circle it. Set a gentle circle with the torch and bring it up to include the top panel. That's our first weld done. Looks good. And I can move along. I'm going to come back this way towards the screw that I put in. Nice, let that go. Right, I'm going to double check, make sure I'm not on fire underneath. So you can see here, I've got two lovely plug welds. I haven't gone too high. We've got the temperature about right, so it's actually included the panel into the weld. So brilliant. So I just need to keep moving along, pushing the two panels together and getting it welded up. Another quick tip, just to make sure that you're getting those panels as close together as possible. So the weld that I've done either side here, what I would do now is take a block of wood and place it over the weld hole that I'm going to do and give it a little thump with a hammer just to make sure that that's seated down onto the tunnel below. So that has, so now I can get a weld into that part there. Nice. Also, another little tip whilst you're welding, you do need plenty of ventilation. Even though I've removed as much of the paint as possible, you still get a little bit of burn and quite a bit of fumes. So get some nice ventilation through there and stop inhaling that rubbish. So that's the front half of the floor pan plug welded. Really happy, it went nicely. Managed to keep the pan really close to the centre part of the tunnel, so that's good. So we've got hardly any air gap there at all. The next sort of fiddly bit is going to be the back half. The fiddly bit going down by the side of the seat runner here. I'm going to have to do it from this side and try and get something down there to actually force the floor pan down to meet the tunnel part, and then we can get the welding done. But it might be a little bit more fiddly. I might have to change my position slightly. So a really good start on the floor pan. I've got the weld done across the front and all the way down to the seat frame here, and then obviously right the way to the back of the strength part of our seat runner part. Now the next bit is obviously the rear part of the floor pan. That's why I've swapped sides to sort of give myself a little bit more room. It was quite cramped obviously over doing the other side, but needs must, we have to do what we have to do. So next I'm gonna try and force the floor pan at the back here because it's lifted slightly back down to the tunnel lip, and then we can get a few, as I say, welds on. So I'm going to start here and then work my way back, and that'll help us get the two panels together. Welding completed along the length of the pan on the inside. I've just got to come across the back now where that separate piece is. So it can be a little bit fiddly because I need to line up the bolt holes with that separate piece as well as weld it nice and tightly together. So I'm going to have a little fiddle around and get it to sit nice and then start getting that bit welded in. So that's the floor pan complete. I've taken out the screws, so all I have left to do is just fill those little screw holes up with the welder. And then go around and grind off the tops of the plug welds, make them all nice and clean, seal it up and paint it. And that's the floor pan complete. So we're on to the heater channel. So we can start welding that in place. Again, I've got this screwed in a couple of places. So up the front here, it's screwed in, can't move. And on the inside where the inner panel meets, I've got it screwed in there. And also I've got it supported with the correct amount of packing on the ramp here. And that was to measure from here to the bottom of that panel. That was our datum point. So once I got that right, then I knew the rest of the panel was right. Obviously we're welded here, so it keeps it nice and strong during the welding process. And at the end I can cut that off. I'm going to start the welding at the front, get it secured here to the bulkhead, and then move down towards the back and get it secured there. Obviously I've got our frame in place here, so the centre's not going to move. Let's get this bit done. So this one's a little bit more awkward. I'm literally going through the front of the bulkhead back onto this heater channel. So the holes that I drilled are all ready and prepped, so let's go for it. Start with a plug weld this side. Now I can move to the inside of the bulkhead panel. As you can see, it was sort of knocked out the way to be able to get this in, so now I need to tap it back down, tidy it up and then weld it up. And that'll be the inner part done. That's the front part of our heater channel welded on. Really happy with that. So we've got a good weld here and down here onto the bulkhead. Obviously our floor pan is bolted to the underside of our heater channel as well to help keep it in place while we continue with our welding. Next I'm going to weld the bottom of the B post to our new heater channel. Obviously I repaired the bottom part of that B post originally as it was quite rotten, and we can get a decent weld across that now. So let's get that bit done. That's the front of the B-post welded, and now I can move around the side and get the inner part welded up as well. So the last couple of bits left on our heater channel is obviously our rear quarter to fix to the heater channel. I've marked 3 little places here. I'm going to try and leave, what I want to do is leave a water drain. Originally it would have had drains, but when this was welded up some time ago, they welded all the way along there and didn't leave a drain. So the moisture gets trapped in that panel and can't come out. So I've made a little, I've managed to hammer a little scallop on all 3 of those places. So when I'm welding, I know where to stop and start again. So that's that bit. And then we can pop in the closing panel. Now the closing panel, as its name suggests, closes the back end of our heater channel off. This is a panel we do. I've obviously adjusted this panel to suit the car. I've put some extra holes in here, and these holes will actually go through and allow us to do plug welding onto the back of the heater channel lip. And that will give it superior strength all the way through. And then I can go back inside and finish up the panel inside. I'm trying to be really careful on this point because the metal on obviously our new heater channel is really good, and the metal on the rear quarter panel maybe not quite as thick as this channel. So I'm trying to put all the heat into the channel first and then just include that panel. So it's a little bit tricky. And only short blast as well, so just to try and keep the heat down. So that is kind of working. As I say, I'm hitting the heavy panel first and then just trying to include a little bit of the quarter panel because the material is a bit thinner than this. And obviously I need to remember to stop welding at our water drain. Don't want to weld those up after all that effort. So I'm just making sure that our panel that we're welding to, our quarter panel that we're welding to our heater channel is tapped flat, so we've got a minimum air gap. I don't want any gap at all. Makes welding a lot easier. Cool, so that's flat against our heater channel now, and I can carry on and weld that section. So I've got our closing panel in position. It's quite fiddly. I'm going to put a little tack on this side because I can't just weld it in straight away. I need to make sure it's in exactly the right position. So I'm going to put a little tiny tack this side. I've got our closing panel tacked in place on the inside. Now all I need to do is make sure that I can get our plug welds through onto the channel on the outside. And I'm going to give that a little bit of a push with the wood to make sure it's real nice and tight and we haven't got any gaps. Let's get that bit. Might be a little bit awkward holding that and welding at the same time, but we'll have a go. Plug welding part of that rear closing panel done. Next I'm going to weld that panel back to the bottom of the heater channel, so it's going to be a little bit more tricky. Tap him into place. And what I need to make sure I don't do is weld the floor pan to the heater channel, because then we're in trouble. We need to keep the two separate, because if ever the body was to be unbolted, it wouldn't come undone if I'd welded those two together. So as you can see, I've just tapped our closing panel past the lower part of our heater channel, just to make it a little bit easier to start welding here and go all the way along here. Okay, I'm left-handed welding, hence why I'm supporting with my right. I can, yeah, ambidextrous weld. Right, I can give that a bit of a clean up with the old wire brush. As you can see, I've popped a couple of holes in here. It makes it more difficult when you're welding with a big air gap behind, hence why I've done that. So I'll fill this up and finish welding here, and I can grind that off nice and tidily. Not the nicest, but we can sort it, it's not a problem. Right, good. Let's fill the little holes up that I blew through, so we can grind that up and that'll be lovely. Next we can tap that back down, but I think I'm going to go inside and finish up the welding on the inside first, and then come back around and finish this off on the outside. Well, that's our closing panel fitted for the outside, so that's closed off our heater channel and tied our rear quarter together back to the rest of the car. Now, to finish that off, we've got this panel. Now, I had to make this panel and I had to remove this. Oh, let's pop that back in. I had to remove this to be able to fit a new heater channel. So if you're doing the heater channel without taking the car off of the body, this part you will need to cut out to allow you to manipulate getting the channel out. And then you basically make a new bit up and put it in, which is where we're at now. So the last little bit on the inside is to get this to fit nicely and weld it back in. And there's another little piece that goes in here, as this part is double skinned, so it's the top skin that goes on there. Again, that will be welded on and ground off, you won't see it. So that's our last section closed up indoors of our heater channel section done. It was quite fiddly. There had been repairs there before, so that always makes it a little bit more difficult and a little bit more time consuming. But anyway, it was worth the effort, and I think we're all good there. Also on the outside, I just finished off the welding, closing up the closing panel. There was a couple of little bits I needed to do. There was a couple of little plug welds back on each other, and also a little bit of seam welding down the back. And that's that done. Next, it's the A-pillar, or the bottom of the A-post. So prep-wise, I'd already cut that out. I did a lot of measuring to make sure I got it right, and obviously I've got a lot of measurements to make sure I get this piece right. The last thing I want to do is weld this in the wrong position and have to cut it out and start again. So I did a lot of measurements from the hinge to the hinge and back from the tunnel to over here. So I'm going to put it in place, double check my measurements, and then we're going to tack it in place, and then we can carry on and weld it properly. It took quite a bit of time to get the line right, and again it was just taking my time with the grinder. Once I knew the size of the gap that I needed, I could just gently take a bit off at a time and keep trial fitting. Obviously this was in position with our frame, and I could keep trial fitting until it fitted in there nice and snug, and then lined up with the measurements we had. So quite excited, because once we've got this bottom of the A-post in, that means we can remove this framework and I can actually sort of get in the car then. So before I attempt any welding, I just need to double check that I've removed all of our powder coating from the area that I'm going to be welding. Obviously I'm welding here, I've removed it, but I haven't removed it on the back actually. So I need to do that, otherwise it will just burn. So let's get that bit done, and then thankfully I can get it in and get this bit finished. I'm really quite excited about this. I already put a screw through the back of it to hold it in position once I lined it up previously. This was before obviously I welded the heater channel in. So let's see if I can get that screw back in, and I'll just double check our measurements twice probably and then start welding. So the first tack weld I put on this panel is the most important. If I get this wrong, I'll have to grind it off and start again. And if I do get it wrong, continue, the rest of the thing will be out. So it has to be absolutely bob on, again with the measurements. But the main thing, it has to be absolutely flat with this part of the panel. A dog leg or a kink, it needs to be absolutely spot on. There are a couple of ways of doing it. This is going to be a butt joint. So the two pieces of metal, I've managed to grind them so they literally fit together as a joint like that, and then we weld across the two together. You can do what's called a joggle joint, so you joggle one part of the metal there, which actually puts it behind, and you would lay that over the top and then weld the two together. Cool. Which is really good and gives a good strong weld, but really difficult to do in an area like this, hence why I've done the butt style joint. So it's got to be spot on, otherwise it'd be a real pain later on. Right, I'm happy with it there. I'm not going to move my hand. I've got my magic gloves on. I'm going to pop a tack on it and hopefully it'll be good. Hopefully that didn't move. Let that cool. Still feels good that way. Feels good that way. Obviously, check measurements now, as you've only got one tack to grind off if you got it wrong. With the aid of a straight edge, I can whack it on there like so and get a real quick visual on whether that's straight or not, and that's really good actually. I'm pleased with that. Okay, tack number 2 is going to be on this outer edge, and that will stop it moving that way. And then tack number 3 goes on the bottom. Once all those tacks are done and everything's spot on, then we'll do the full weld. Tack number 2, see if we can get this spot on as well. Again, we'll just let that cool and then I'll double check our measurements. And then as I say, we get our last tack on the bottom and we're in business. Good measurements, so I'm pleased with that. It looks like it's in line by eye and with my straight edge. I'm really happy. So tack number 3, the last tack, and then we can just crack on and weld it in. That's the bottom part of the pillar welded up. I will get a small grinder in there to tidy up the welds. They're okay, they're pretty good, but yeah, I'll give it a little tidy up. So the next tricky bit is obviously putting this panel to the original A-Pillar panel. So I'm going to take my time and get the welding nice through here, because obviously I'm going to have to grind that back because that's all on display, that's very visual, so it needs to be really good. That's the bottom of the A-Pillar in and welded. It was a little bit fiddly. When you're joining nice new panels to slightly older panels, you get a discrepancy in thicknesses of material, so it can make the welding a little bit more challenging. But you can always grind and start again and just take your time, really. So I'm quite happy with that. There was a couple of little places that gave me a little bit of grief, but nothing too serious. I managed to do some of the welding in the inside here to join the two panels together, and the stiffener that goes between the two is obviously welded, and then all the welding on the outside also. Our next little mission is to remove our frame now, because obviously we've got all our strength back this side, so nothing's going to move now because it's welded in place. Frame out, trial fit the door? Nah, the door will be fine. Pop the door on, just check it, make sure it's good, because at this point if it's not good we can adjust this before I do all this stuff. I'll make it a lot more difficult otherwise. Then the door off, grind all my welds up, seal all the welds up and a bit of painting, and then we can tackle the front corner. Well, that's the door trial fitted. Everything seems to line up. A little bit of a jiggle to get the lower hinge bolts in, but done now, so that's cool. Striker's back on so we can close it. Everything looks good, and the gap along the bottom, there isn't one, so that's good. So it closes up against our heater channel. So that's excellent. So I can take the door off now, and then finish all the grinding inside, and then we can do sealing and paintwork. So really good progress, really happy with where we're at. Obviously got our floor pan in, all welded in, and I've gone around and done the zinc spray on all of our bare parts that were bare after my welding cleanup. The only thing we got left to do is the seam sealing, but I'm going to do that right at the end. Reason being is because I'm going to do seam sealing all in one go due to the next part of the project. Yeah, we didn't forget about it. I always said I'd come back to this part, so this is the part we're coming back to now, is this front quarter panel. Do you remember this? Yeah, pretty ugly, isn't it? Okay, so next we're going to chop that off.